I was a middle-aged man in the middle of nowhere, serving drinks to my boss at a company party and trying to keep him in a good mood. I'm turning 32 this year. As my friends and coworkers get married one by one, there hasn't been a hint of romance in my life. I know, just waiting won't lead to any romantic encounters. But there's someone I can't seem to forget, which is likely why I don't feel compelled to actively seek a partner. Once my boss' lengthy monologue finally concluded, I excused myself to the restroom. I thought I might step outside and get a breath of fresh air, just to space out a bit, and as I was wandering down the hallway of the bar, I bumped into her. The person I would never forget, my high school sweetheart. She has a more mature vibe now, but it was definitely Susan. She seemed to have noticed me too, and stopped in the middle of the hallway. Jack. She called my name, then fell silent. It's been a while. I'm here having drinks with my boss. We hadn't been in touch for over a decade since our falling out, so I wasn't sure how to interact with her. I'm here for dinner, with friends. Despite this unexpected reunion, that was all the conversation we managed to have. We parted ways with a simple well then. Susan and I dated since high school, and our relationship continued even as we attended different colleges. But we broke up over a fight during our job hunting phase. I was the one to blame. Susan, a brilliant and beautiful woman, was attending a prestigious university. She secured a job relatively early. However, I was the complete opposite. I attended a mediocre college and had a hard time finding a job. During my senior year, I grew frustrated as I still couldn't land a job. It would have been bearable if that was it, but I was jealous of Susan. Despite her trying to support me and consider my feelings, I, back then, felt pitiful as it being pitted. I lashed out at her with harsh words like, "You wouldn't understand how I feel. You're probably looking down on me, and stop acting like a goody two-shoes, making a fool out of me." I even said something far worse. It was only natural that she eventually got fed up with me. After parting with Susan, I managed to secure a job at my current company. But there was no more communication between Susan and me. In my 20s, I learned from a high school classmate that Susan got married and moved to Chicago due to her husband's job transfer. I had mixed feelings, but also felt relieved. As long as she was happy somewhere, that was good enough for me. After hearing about her marriage, I thought it was about time for me to move on as well, so I did go on a few blind dates, but I never really met anyone suitable. And that brings us to now. About a week after running into Susan at the bar, I was visiting my favorite cafe after work. I enjoyed buying coffee beans from this place and brewing coffee at home on my days off. I developed a love for coffee back in college. Now I've become so particular about selecting beans and how I grind them. As I entered the cafe, eager for a new batch of beans, there was Susan, enjoying a cake set. This was our second encounter. "We meet again," I murmured, surprised at the unexpected coincidence. "Really, are you alone?" I briefly explained that I often come here to buy coffee beans. "What about you? Are you alone? Isn't your husband waiting at home?" I didn't even know you were back from Chicago." At my words, Susan lowered her eyes. And she opened her mouth, putting on a forced smile. "My husband passed away 4 years ago. I've been living in Chicago since then. I've only recently moved back here." "I see. I'm sorry. That was thoughtless of me. I didn't know her husband had passed away. I thought she was still building a happy home." After that, our conversation didn't continue, and we said see you and parted again. Susan, who lost her husband and lives alone in San Francisco. I want to talk to her more. I want to get closer to her. But I don't feel I have the right, because I hurt her with my harsh words at the end of our relationship. About a month later, on a night of a terrible typhoon, I had my third encounter with my widow ex-girlfriend, Susan. My apartment is beyond the station, so I passed by the station on my way home from work. The station was crowded with people. The trains were stopped or delayed. In the midst of all this, I found Susan on the phone, taking shelter from the rain. Susan also noticed me immediately and called out to me. "Amazing, we met again." "Yeah, is the train stopped?" When I asked, Susan nodded with a bitter smile. "It stopped. I don't know when it'll start moving again, but both the buses and taxis are crowded with people, so it doesn't look like I'll be able to get on." I just tried calling a nearby hotel, but it's no good. It's hard to find a place that's open. Even when it's not a typhoon, this station is busy, so I guess that's inevitable. But when I glanced at Susan, her clothes and hair were wet. Even though it's early spring, the nights are chilly. I handed her a handkerchief. Use this, you must be cold. Oh, thank you. I had an umbrella, but the rain and wind were so strong. When I found Susan, the rain and wind had just calmed down, but before that, both the rain and the wind had been terrible, and the sky looked like it was going to start pouring again soon. I couldn't just leave Susan, who had no way to get home or a hotel to stay in. Do you want to come to my place? The words naturally slipped out of my mouth, but I immediately regretted them. There is no way she'd want to come to the home of her ex-boyfriend, who she always fought with. That's what I thought, but Susan's response was unexpected. You're willing to let me stay. When I looked at Susan, she looked up at me with moist eyes. I felt nervous looking into the eyes of her, who had become more mature. But those eyes seemed to be asking me for help. Sure, come on. At my words, Susan smiled softly and seemed relieved. And so, Susan came to stay at my apartment. When we got home, I had Susan, who was probably cold from getting wet, took a bath. Seeing Susan with her wet hair after the bath, wearing my clothes as a change of pajamas, made my heart race, but I had no ulterior motive in inviting her, so I tried to hide it. After drying her hair, Susan said, I'd like some coffee, could you brew it for me? I've been missing it for a while. There was a bag of coffee beans and a grinder where Susan was looking. I used to make coffee for her frequently when we were in college and dating. Sure, I replied. I ground the beans carefully, just for Susan. She was watching me so attentively that I asked, do you want to try grinding the beans? At first, Susan nodded, but then she hesitated and said, actually, I'll pass. I want you to do it, Jack. I've missed your coffee, she said. Even if her words were just courtesy, they made me happy. As the coffee was almost ready, I asked her how she wanted it. Do you want it as a café au lait? Yes, you remember that, she said. Susan couldn't drink black coffee. When we were dating, I always made it into café au lait by adding milk for her. I still remembered it well. Of course, I remember it, I said, offering Susan the freshly made café au lait. Susan took the mug from me with both hands and carefully brought it to her lips. Ah, it's delicious. The aroma is soothing. I've missed this. I've missed your café au lait after we broke up. I've been wanting to drink it for over 10 years. I've been holding back for more than 10 years. The phrase more than 10 years seemed to have a significant weight. I poured my own coffee too. Like in my college days and even now, I prefer it black. Drinking my own brewed coffee is my daily routine. But today's coffee, which I shared with Susan, tasted even better than usual. After finishing our coffee, we discussed where we were going to sleep. Jokingly, I asked, I only have one bed. Is it okay if we sleep together? I wanted Susan, who seemed to feel guilty for staying over, to at least smile. I figured she'd retort with something like, no, it's not okay, since she's got a vibe like that. But her reply was okay. Stunned, I looked at Susan, who was looking at me with a serious expression. I've been lonely since my husband passed away, she said. I couldn't help but feel an urge to hug Susan. But I knew this didn't mean she had feelings for me. Susan has been spending lonely nights since her husband's death. Today, perhaps due to the stormy weather, her loneliness had just erupted. I thought if she spent the night in the same room or bed with me, she'd regret it. And not just Susan. I might regret letting the mood carry me away, even though I care about her. So I thought there was only one thing I could do. Susan, I'm sorry for my inappropriate joke. You can sleep on the bed. I'll sleep on the living room couch. I don't want you to regret anything because of your current feelings, I said. Maybe Susan had anticipated what I was going to say. Susan nodded without arguing or saying anything. No, you're right, I'm sorry, she said. It seemed Susan agreed, which relieved me. Even though I decided not to get swept away, considering that this might be the last time I saw Susan, I thought I should apologize for something I had wanted to apologize for a long time. Susan, I'm sorry about when we broke up. When we broke up, do you mean the argument we had? I found myself rethinking whether I could call what happened an argument. From the moment we started dating until we broke up, I never saw a single fault in Susan. When we were in high school, I once asked her why she would even consider dating a guy like me. Back then, just like now, I was a pretty ordinary guy, mediocre at academics and sports. In contrast, Susan was rumored to be adorable, an honor student, popular with teachers, and highly academic. I just couldn't see what balanced out between us. But as it turns out, Susan and I did not meet for the first time in high school. Apparently, we were in the same class in kindergarten, a fact I had forgotten. I'm told I protected Susan back then when she was being bullied. From that point on, I was considered a hero in Susan's eyes. Susan moved away when we were in senior kindergarten, but she told me that she never forgot about me. I had no recollection of doing anything so admirable. I vaguely remember helping a girl back then, but I feel like I was just trying to show off, being a little kindergartner. Susan recounted the story of our kindergarten days several times after we started dating. I used to find it cute that she remembered such things, but by the time I was job hunting, I was sick of hearing it. Because it just wasn't possible for a pathetic guy like me, who couldn't even secure a job, to be a hero. That was when I had just been rejected by the 10th company. I was feeling the bitter truth of how much your alma mater matters in job hunting. With no job offers coming my way, I felt like I was being denied as a person. Susan, who had already secured a job, was trying to encourage me. But I was so immature at that time, I found Susan's kindness annoying. So I told her, shut up. Everything is so perfect for you, Susan. You've always been a top student, got into a good college, found a job right away. You don't know what it feels like to be a failure like me. Susan's eyes were welling up with tears. Don't talk like that about yourself, Jack. You're my hero. But I was even frustrated with my job search, and my frustration was maxed out when she told me the story. I'm tired of hearing that story. I don't know it. I can't remember stuff from kindergarten. Stop imposing your ideals on me. I'm not your hero. In fact, I don't want to hear your pointless stories anymore. You're annoying me. I still can't forget the look on Susan's face when I said that. It was hurt. That day I told her to go away, and she left, her shoulders drooping. After that, I ignored Susan, who kept apologizing. I just wanted her to leave me alone. Then one day, she told me over the phone, let's break up. It was only natural, considering the awful things I had said. All I think I said was, I understand. As I was reminiscing, Susan's voice brought me back to reality. She was laughing at my apology, a decade late. No, it's okay. It's not all your fault, you know. Looking back, I think I should have stood back and watched over you a little more. I was young, and I just thought I had to be there for you. That I had to say something to encourage you. I think that just put more pressure on you and made you more irritated. Maybe we were just too young, both of us. I was happy at Susan's kindness, saying that even though I was the one to blame. But, you know, when we met again in high school after being apart since kindergarten, I really thought it was destiny. But I guess it wasn't. We really can be together, can we? I had nothing to say to that. That day we slept in separate rooms, and when I woke up the next day, Susan was gone from my apartment. The room without Susan felt cold, as if the temperature had dropped. That's when I spotted a note from Susan on the table. If we meet again, I hope we can be together next time. I saw that and ran out of the house. Surprisingly, I caught up with Susan quickly as I ran towards the station. She was walking slowly, her eyes swollen from crying. I moved to stand in front of Susan and took her hand. I squeezed her slightly cold hand warmly before expressing my feelings. I'm sorry. I said I'd regret it if I let things slide yesterday, but that was just an excuse. The truth is, I've always loved you, and I still do. I was just being a coward yesterday. I was scared. I had hurt you once, and I wondered if I could make you happy again. I also thought I definitely couldn't beat your deceased husband. I was thinking if it was okay for me, if I had the right to say I wanted to be by your side. I was scared and couldn't say anything. Susan's handwriting on the note was shaky. I thought she must have written it while crying, and my chest tightened, so I started running. Susan, you said our reunion in high school was destiny. I feel the same way. I think our reunion here as adults is destiny. I won't hurt you anymore. I'll cherish you in my own way, without comparing to anyone else. So, I want to be with you. Please give me another chance. Will you date me? After I finished speaking, I felt somewhat embarrassed. I mean, a guy over 30 talking about destiny. But it seemed Susan felt the same way. She chuckled and said, "Sometimes you can be such a romantic, Jack. But I like that about you." Susan and I smiled and made eye contact. "Do you want to go back to my place again? I'll make you a delicious cup of coffee." "Of course, I'll make yours a latte. Let's talk about the past and the future." "That sounds good. I have a lot of things I want to talk about, too." We then walked hand in hand back to my place. Since then, Susan and I have been dating smoothly. And tomorrow, after about a year, we're getting married. Today we came to visit the grave of Susan's previous husband. This is not the first time I've come to visit his grave with Susan. Before I confessed to Susan, I was pessimistic about whether I could make her happy like her previous husband did. But I realized it's not about comparing. The fact that her husband cherished Susan, I accept that, and I decided to cherish Susan in my own way. That's why I visited the grave that I wanted him to rest easy. I'll protect Susan's smile. When Susan asked what I was thinking about when I was paying respects, I kept it a secret. It's a secret conversation between men that I can't tell Susan. Susan was sulking, saying, "I'm curious," but she seemed rather happy. After visiting the grave, we returned to our new home, our own home to live in together. When I was about to make coffee, Susan said she preferred juice. She usually doesn't say things like that, so I was worried and asked if she was feeling unwell. But seeing me flustered, Susan grinned. Then she placed a hand on her stomach and said, "I'll have to pass on the latte for a while. The caffeine might startle this little one." As I realized what her words meant, I couldn't help but yell out in joy. I held Susan in my arms. Our baby is due in 7 months. I can't wait for this new chapter of our lives. So, how did you like our story? Your subscription to our channel greatly motivates us to create more content. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video. 2 years into our marriage, yet I still considered us newlyweds. 2 years since the day we vowed to spend forever together. My heart sank at the sight of my wife, unashamedly declaring, "I'm pregnant." The father was my boss. "We should wait to have kids. I want to enjoy our time as newlyweds." Those words from my wife, when we got married, echoed in my mind. My name is Ryan Kitchener. I turned 30 this year. I married my wife Susan 2 years ago. We met at work. We were in different departments, but worked for the same company. Every time we crossed paths in the hallways of our office building or in the elevator, I thought to myself, what a beautiful woman she was. When a coworker introduced us, I was so thrilled my heart did a little victory dance. I was always looking for an opportunity to talk to Susan, and I wasn't going to let this chance slip by. I watched every movie and read every book she recommended. My attempts to close the distance between us, slowly but surely, started to bear fruit. Back then, it seemed Susan had a boyfriend, but I didn't ask too much about him. I was indicating that it didn't matter to me. Even now, I'm amazed at my own tenacious efforts. Susan quit her job, by her own volition, and is now a stay-at-home wife. I'm happy that she's keeping our home safe. Susan goes to cooking and flower arrangement classes, has leisurely lunches with her friends, and lives a comfortable and relaxed life. 2 years into our marriage, around the time when our parents started hinting about wanting to have grandchildren, an unbelievable incident occurred. The busy season of overtime was over, and I was in high spirits leaving work on time. Thinking that Susan must have been feeling lonely due to my busy schedule, I bought her favorite cake on my way home. For the upcoming long weekend, we could go on a mini vacation. I picked up brochures of nearby tourist spots at a travel agency by the train station. I ordered takeout so Susan wouldn't have to worry about making dinner. I'm home. I managed to get off work early today. As I spoke to Susan while taking off my shoes at the front door, she came running from down the hall. She seemed surprised at my early return. As I explained about ordering takeout for dinner, I handed her the cake she loves. But there was something off about Susan. "Susan, is something wrong?" As I handed her my suit jacket and asked, she gave a small nod. There was a solemn look on her face. As I sat down on the living room couch, Susan took a seat in front of me. Then, She said words that I couldn't believe. "I'm pregnant, and I want us to break up." The words hit me like a blunt force to the back of my head. I could never have imagined hearing such words from Susan. Susan, and I don't have any kids. She was the one who had convinced me, who wanted a child right after we'd married, that it was too soon. Respecting her wish to enjoy our newlywed life a little longer, I had promised to wait for her sake. We were careful these past 2 years. So, what's this new life in her belly? I want a divorce, it's for the child. I never wanted to hear the phrase for the child from Susan's mouth in such a situation. I thought it would be a phrase we'd use joyfully together as a couple. Susan was looking at me expressionlessly, but it seemed her intention to divorce was firm. "Please sign this. I want a divorce, for the sake of my child." Susan laid out divorce papers with her signature already on them before me. The witnesses section was signed by Susan's parents. She had already consulted her parents. I want to know who the father is. But I couldn't afford to lose my cool here. I have my pride, too. "So, you're serious?" In response to my question, Susan gave a firm nod. After that, I only remembered concentrating hard not to let the pen shake in my hand. She carefully folded the signed divorce papers, and it seemed she had already packed her things. A large suitcase in hand, she headed for the door, and I had no words for Susan, who was about to leave. Susan didn't look back at me again. Her feelings for me were gone. It was clear from her expression. She disappeared into the twilight, pulling her suitcase behind her. All I could do was gaze at Susan's retreating figure. That night, I drank alone until I fell asleep. Because I had passed out drunk in the living room, it seemed I had caught a cold. I was hit by a headache and chills which are different from a hangover. I called my workplace. I told them I would be taking a sick day due to poor health. Reflecting on last night, I wondered if it was all a dream. But there were the liquor bottle and that pen on the living room table. It wasn't a dream. Susan really did betray me and left. When reality hit again, my chest throbbed with pain. And I realized the saying, "The cuter they are, the harder they fall," is really true. I can't believe how much I hate Susan, who I loved so much. I have to find the other man. I spent a day rummaging through the belongings Susan left behind with that thought in mind. The ring and bracelet I gave her when we were dating were still in the jewelry case. I found the wedding ring in the trash can. What was Susan thinking when she threw the ring into the trash can? Just imagining that made me feel dizzy. I spent all day looking for clues about the other man, but in the end, I only succeeded in raising my fever. Despite all this, I kept rummaging through her belongings incessantly, feeling as if I'd fall apart if I didn't stay busy. But because I was in such a state, my health didn't fully recover in a day. In the end, I ended up taking a week off from work. Somehow, when I managed to get myself back to work, my coworkers knew about my divorce. Even though I hadn't told HR yet. "How are you feeling, Ryan? You're such a softie, getting sick just because of a divorce." My direct boss, Tom Gary, strolled up to me with a smirk. Gary was always the type to nitpick and make life difficult for me. His overly pretentious demeanor, along with his sleazy behavior, were always off-putting. As I begrudgingly endured his company, I suddenly realized he mentioned the divorce. Then, it hit me, before she got married to me, Susan and Gary used to work in the same department. "Oh, didn't Susan tell you about the divorce? Or was your tiny little pride too precious for that?" He sneered, and the pieces fell into place. "Are you the father of Susan's unborn child?" I asked in a low, grating voice. Gary, in a jesting tone, confirmed, "That's right." He was completely mocking me. For a moment, I didn't realize what I had done. When I came to, Gary was sprawled across the room, a toppled chair and scattered desk items around him. I felt a dull pain in my clenched fist. The ensuing chaos was like something out of a festival. Some people were helping Gary up, others were trying to restrain me. Gary, despite being hit, was laughing. He was laughing at the future trouble I had just invited. He had baited me into it. Gary is the grandson of the founder of our company. I had just punched a future company executive. Of course, I was suspended. And then, inevitably, I was fired. I became an unemployed man, dumped by his wife. My life after that was a wreck. I knew I needed to look for a job to survive. but my actions couldn't catch up with my thoughts. I started drinking during the day, and as night fell, I would start drinking all over again. I suppose this is what they call self-destructive. I had no motivation to do anything. My only consolation was that I had savings. I wanted to thank the old me for being diligent in saving money. While living such days, after about a month, a surprising visitor arrived. At first, I pretended I wasn't home. But 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. Once again, I pretended not to be home. The doorbell rang again an hour later. Annoyed, I wondered who on earth could be bothering me. As I reluctantly opened the front door, I found an unfamiliar woman standing there. She stood tall, gazing at me with a piercing stare. I felt like I was being judged, and I quickly averted my eyes. May I ask your name? I asked. The woman staring at me had a dignified appearance and a face that suggested a strong will. Suddenly, I felt embarrassed about the alcohol on my breath. I hadn't even bothered to shave. Are you the ex-husband of that woman? She asked abruptly, nearly stopping my heart. She didn't beat around the bush. She was Gary's wife. And that woman she mentioned must have been Susan. Well, I stuttered, at a loss for words. The woman deeply bowed her head. She introduced herself as Lillian Gary. Just as I'd imagined, she was Gary's wife. The neighborhood ladies passed by, shooting me curious glances. I always found these gossip-loving folks a bit hard to deal with. Please come inside. I hastily invited Lillian in, trying to avoid the gossip that would inevitably spread otherwise. Thank you, she replied, and walked into the house without hesitation. Of course, I hadn't done any cleaning at all. As I led her into the chaotic living room, she began to silently gather the trash scattered around. I can clean that up myself, I tried to insist, but she cut me off. We can't have a serious conversation in this mess, can we? If you're not going to help, please sit down. She snapped, so I sat up straight. I sat down on the couch and watched in stunned silence as she went about tidying up. Why don't you go wash your face? She suggested. I got startled by her words, and I dashed off to the bathroom. I washed my face quickly. I was shocked at the sight of myself in the mirror, as I looked like a stranger. I washed my face and shaved. I washed and combed my hair. For the first time in a long time, I felt a little bit more like a human. When I returned to the living room, the cleaning was already finished. The trash had been bagged up and set out in the hallway. I used your kitchen, Lillian said as she offered me a cup of tea. She seemed quite reliable for Gary's wife. Thank you. I feel like a human again. I was surprised by how naturally my gratitude spilled out. Lillian gave me a faint smile in response to my words. But in the next moment, her smile disappeared. My husband asked me for a divorce. He said it's because he has a child now. She cut straight to the chase. It seemed she disliked beating around the bush. I was told the same thing by my wife. I'm already divorced. When I told her it was none of my business anymore, she let out a deep sigh. It seemed that the affairs of her husband, Gary, weren't a new occurrence. Apparently, he had resolved a previous scandal with money, and it was also with Susan. Susan took the payoff, and she immediately married me. She told me she had married as proof of ending her relationship with Gary. He had attempted to resolve it with money this time as well, but Susan wasn't budging. From Lillian's tone, I could tell she still loved Gary. She wanted to somehow get rid of Susan. So, I get what you want to say, but you want to mend things with Gary and not get her divorce. This man had cheated on her twice with the same woman and even had a child with her. Could she still be holding on to feelings for him? When asked if she didn't want a divorce, Lillian looked a little surprised. She had an expression as if divorce hadn't even crossed her mind. Do you really think you can start over from this point? Even I think it's a bit mean to ask. But I found her expressions and attitude intriguing. I wanted to know what Lillian's response would be. With a small smile, she simply said, "We're married, after all." I don't know why, but I felt defeated. In the end, I asked Lillian to leave that day, agreeing to discuss it again another time. The day after Lillian's visit, Gary came over. It seemed he had heard from Lillian about her meeting with me yesterday. As a former boss, I decided to invite him into the living room. Gary looked around the living room and then laughed. Find something funny. This Lillian cleaned up, didn't she? Gary said this with amusement in his voice. I hadn't noticed, but it seemed that Lillian's style was reflected in how she tidied up. Feeling the vibe of understanding between them irritated me. When I asked him what brought him here, Gary said he had a request for me. He wanted me to convince Lillian to divorce him, the request that left me shocked. According to Gary, Lillian can't have children. He loves children and needs an heir. The fact that Susan is pregnant was a golden opportunity. He offered me a reward for convincing Lillian to agree to a divorce and placed a thick envelope in front of me. The sight of him trying to solve everything with money made me sick. I want kids, and that's something Lillian can't give me. At these words, I lost my patience. I grabbed him by the collar, but Gary was still laughing. He probably thought he wouldn't get punched twice. Just as I was about to swing my fist, a soft hand gently grasped my raised fist. Is my husband worth punching? Lillian said she had followed Gary. You left the front door wide open. That's careless. As she scolded me, I involuntarily lowered my fist, and I muttered okay. My grip on Gary's collar loosens, momentum extinguished. So you want a child, huh? Lillian murmurs as she looked at Gary. As he nods, she pulls out some documents from her bag. They were divorce papers. Are you satisfied now? Lillian smiled as she offered the papers to Gary. Her smile was stunningly beautiful, almost eerie. It looked as if it could forgive anything and everything, yet at the same time, it was as if it could send someone straight to hell. As Gary takes the divorce papers, his fingers lightly trace over the back of her hand. It felt like I've seen something I shouldn't have, and I quickly averted my eyes. Thank you. Gary leaves these words behind, swiftly striding towards the front door. We're enemies now, aren't we, Gary? Better be ready. Gary waved without turning around to her words. It seemed that he had accepted her declaration of war. Once Gary was out of sight, Lillian turned back to me. Shall we lick our wounds together? But first, let's have our revenge. We both separately demanded compensation from Gary and Susan. They're well off. No matter how much we demand, they're likely to pay. I asked my lawyer to proceed with all matters simultaneously, because I wanted them to suffer, even if just a little. This would be just a bit of payback. Child's play, really. After demanding the compensation, Susan finally came crying. It seems Gary will pay his own part, but he won't pay Susan's portion. They're not married yet, so it's only natural, but it seems there's more to it. At a meeting between the four of us, Gary started saying that I was also to blame for Susan's affair. He claimed it was a result of making her feel lonely due to my constant work. You sure have a knack for blowing smoke, don't you? It won't work on me. What Lillian pulled out was a report on Gary's personal investigation. The investigation had apparently been requested by Gary's parents. Susan and Gary had been involved before my marriage to her, and at one point, Susan had accepted a settlement to sever ties. However, behind the scenes, the relationship continued. Apparently, my marriage to her was suggested by Gary as a camouflage. I love my work and I'm a bit insensitive. For them, having an insensitive husband was very convenient. Moreover, since I was working with Gary, they could always keep an eye on me. The report Gary's parents had put together by spending a considerable amount of money was unbelievably detailed. Lillian reads through the contents in a steady voice. The color drains from Gary and Susan's faces. The first to break was Susan. She starts to scream on Mr. Tears, "Stop it. Stop it now. It's not good for the baby if you stress yourself out so much." In a reprimand, Susan flinched. Being stared down by Lillian's icy eyes, Susan fainted on the spot. Gary, panicking, cradled Susan in his arms, to which Lillian smiled. Already surrendering, that's a shame. I believe Lillian truly loved Gary. Love and hate are two sides of the same coin. The deeper the love, the deeper the hate. It seemed Gary understood that, too. In the end, I had no role in the discussion, and the meeting ended with Lillian dominating the conversation. At the end, Lillian laughed at me, saying, "That's it." Afterwards, the reason for my divorce became well known at work. I was the one who had leaked it to my coworkers. The company wanted to cover it up, but it was too late. In the end, Gary was sidelined at work and had no place in his family. After remarrying, Susan is struggling with in-law issues. It seems that Gary's parents, who liked Lillian, are harshly treating Susan, who took Lillian's place after driving her out. I think it serves her right. When everything about the alimony and other issues had been settled, I invited Lillian for a coffee. She told me about her current situation, working at a friend's company while living alone. I can't have children, so I need to be self-sufficient. I don't feel the same fear I did back then when I see Lillian speaking with such a sincere expression. Your reason for being independent seems a bit off. I disagreed with Lillian. She looked at me, surprised. It was the first time I had strongly insisted on something. I noticed she was still wearing her wedding ring. It was proof she hadn't forgotten Gary. Summoning my courage, I decided to give her the words I had been practicing since last night. I don't mind that. She looked at me with a puzzled expression. I took a deep breath. Then I asked her to wait until I found a job, as I was applying to be Lillian's boyfriend. Lillian and I will definitely work out. We understand each other's pain. I will never hurt you. From my expression, she seemed to understand that I wasn't joking. She looked down once and then chuckled. I'm quite a handful, you know. I am well aware of that, I replied. I gently traced the back of her hand with my finger. It seemed like she was recalling something as she squinted her eyes. She gently brushed off my finger and then took off her ring. I felt it was her way of breaking away from her past. Then, she lightly touched my hand. Her delicate fingers traced the back of my hand. It felt like her love was flowing into me from her fingertips. I'll make you happy, so please wait. Lillian laughs as if she's bursting with joy. I swore in my heart to always protect that smile. What did you think? Subscribing to the channel will encourage us to produce more. See you in the next video. During the lunch break at work. After eating lunch with my colleagues, I was reading a comic book at my own desk. Even when the bell rang to let us know the end the lunch break, I was engrossed in the story, wanting to read just one more page. Then, somebody tapped me on the shoulder from behind. When I turned around, it was my direct superior, the department head. In a hurry, I opened the drawer and threw in the comic book. Hey Johnson, you got a moment? Could you come to the conference room with me? The department head spoke to me in the same mild and gentle tone as always. Immediately, I got up from my seat and followed the department head to the conference room. When we entered the empty conference room, the department head asked me if I wasn't going to take any more paid leaves. In the previous month, I sporadically took day offs almost every week. What about it, Johnson? Are you going to take some day offs this month, or not? Saying that, the department head gave me a sharp stare. As I was lost for words to reply, the department head spoke ruthlessly. You don't want to work with me, do you? As you wished, you're going to be let go from my department and also from the head office. The department head told me that this was a transfer order. I had no right to refuse, and I was forced to either follow the transfer order or quit the company. So you mean, I'm being demoted that night? When I got home, I told my girlfriend Mary about the situation. I'd been living with her for almost 7 years. I was forced by the department head to choose between following the transfer order or quitting the company, and I chose to stay in the company. The place I was being transferred to was a sales office in a remote area in the Midwest. Mary asked me why I was being demoted. When I hesitated to answer, Mary said, "Could it be that you were trying to change jobs and the company found out?" She hit the nail on the head. With a stunned face, Mary sighed. She said that she had a vague idea on the reason why I was taking day offs during the week and going somewhere. I have already changed jobs 4 times since I graduated from college. It's not that I have any particular complaints about any of the companies I've worked for. However, once I've been in a job for 3 or 4 years and get used to it, I get bored. Not that I have any ambition either. I just felt like, maybe it's about time I tried something different. However, there was another reason why I decided to attempt this 5th job change. I'm already 40. I was thinking of settling down at my next job. And once that job gets secured, I was thinking of going to the next step with my relationship with Mary. So, I consulted with a headhunting agent and managed to get interviews with several companies, but my age was a barrier to get a new job somehow. I was considering giving up on changing jobs. And then came the demotion. I never thought that my job hunting would be found out by the department head. I can understand why your boss got pissed off. His trusted subordinate was secretly trying to change jobs behind his back. I had nothing to say to Mary's words. So anyway, I'm being transferred, right? So, um, when I tried to ask her to come with me, Mary cut me off sharply. I have my life here, building my career. Besides, I'm not obliged to follow you to such a remote place. We're not even married. After that, Mary and I got into a heated argument. Being at a disadvantage, I pouted like a spoiled child and took a nap on the living room couch. Then, I began to reflect on my relationship with Mary since I met her. I first met Mary at a friend's wedding reception. She wasn't exceptionally pretty, but there was something welcoming about her face that drew me to her. She asked me about my job. I told her I had switched jobs twice and proudly said, staying at one company for too long is outdated. She nodded approvingly and said, Johnson, you're very career-oriented, aren't you? She was the one who suggested exchanging numbers. She was also the one who planned our dates for the most part. We became a couple within 6 months. And soon after, we started living together. You know how young couples are constantly giggling together over nothing. That's how we were. We never stopped laughing when we were together. Everything we did was fun. We really need to clean this dusty floor. True, but I can't be bothered today. We laughed our heads off, simply at the thought of skipping cleaning of our apartment over the weekend. Fast forward to about 4 years from those happy days. When I started looking for another job, Mary, upon finding out, questioned my decision. Things at work were going smoothly, and I was well compensated. I didn't have any issues with my coworkers either. Despite all this, she asked me why I was considering changing jobs. Well, because there's a company out there, you know. I jokingly replied, but she didn't laugh. It was clear that she started to doubt my true nature. She realized that my attitude towards work was not about career progression, but simply about being fickle. From then on, her look at me changed. Not just about work, but also about our relationship. Despite living together for so long, I never brought up the topic of marriage, and this seemed to trigger distrust in her. Fast forward another 3 years. We stopped laughing together and stopped doing things together. We felt there was no reason to live together anymore, but we also didn't have a reason to break up either. Amid this uneventful life, I suddenly received the notice of my transfer. I don't expect her to follow me to such a remote place. We're not even married. The idea of resettling the job and the relationship with Mary upon turning 40 was just my own selfish, wishful thinking. The new place of assignment was in rural Montana, way out in the sticks. The office was a rickety old single-story building that seemed to be decades old. 5 male employees of different ages and a 40-year-old woman named Susan, who was the director, worked there. While all the male employees seemed dull, she was different. With her clear-cut facial features and short hairstyle, along with her brisk way of talking and carrying herself, she was the epitome of a successful career woman. I couldn't help but wonder why such a woman was managing a remote office like this one. So, what did you do to deserve this? In a partitioned-off, makeshift reception area, I was summoned by the director Susan and started our conversation like so. I was at a loss for response. Then, she informed me that unless I stirred up some sort of trouble, I wouldn't have been assigned to the sales office. She said, if you don't want to talk about it, I won't push you, and changed the subject. She explained that the primary task in this sales office is customer follow-up. Also, our assigned region is surprisingly big, so there would be a need to get around using a company car. She asked me if I had any questions. Well, my company found out that I'd been looking for other jobs. I stuttered, oddly answering her initial question. Something about Susan made me want to share everything. It felt like a magic. Then, she opened my work history document that she had requested from the corporate HR department. So, you've switched jobs a few times before joining our company, huh? Yes, I tend to want to change my workplace when I get accustomed to the job. I replied and found myself repeatedly bowing to her subconsciously. I see. I have a proposal for you, Restless Johnson. Will you be open to it? I found her bluntness rather refreshing. She then revealed her plan. Ever since her partner became the director, they had been hoping to improve the performance of this sales office by actively acquiring new customers. However, they lacked the right talent to achieve it. Would you like to give it a try? Consider it like switching jobs, she suggested. Her gaze held an undeniable intensity. I'll do it, I have no other choice, I thought. Even if it's a small sales office, if I could contribute to increasing the performance, I might be able to return to the headquarters. That's how my life at the new office began. Though I was expecting nothing out of it, it was surprisingly rewarding and made me hopeful for what we could accomplish. Every weekend, I would visit the apartment where Mary still lived by herself. There, too, things started to change. I was eager for Mary to hear about my week at the new office. I would start trembling. At first, she showed me no interests, but slowly, she began to pay attention to what I was saying. It seems like you're actually happy about the transfer, you're weird. It's not a transfer, it's a job switch, a new job. I said it laughing. Mary joined in, calling me a fool. We both burst out laughing. My sales rounds gradually gained momentum, and the number of new clients also steadily increased. The sales office's performance was on an upward trend. Susan was also pleased, and we started to spend more time after work having drinks at the only pub near the office. The sales office, Director Susan, and we all enjoyed a smooth sailing period. However, on a Friday half a year later, Director Susan, who had been out at the headquarters all day, returned to the sales office in the evening. Unlike her usual brisk self, she looked as if she had lost her soul. I rushed over to her immediately. It's all over, everything. Susan muttered to me, then straightened her back and announced the news to everyone. The sales office would be closed at the end of the next fiscal year. She asked everyone to start considering their next moves as soon as they received their dismissal notices, as there would be nothing she could do about personnel matters at that point. As she slumped into her chair, she looked at me. They're banning new sales activity too. We keep adding customers. It's gonna be a hassle later on. Susan had said just that before she buried her face in her hands and slumped over the desk. The closure of our branch and the order to halt all new businesses were a shock to me also. What am I supposed to do from now on? I really wanted to hop on a train and talk about the situation with Mary immediately. However, as I was getting ready to leave, Susan talked to me. Johnson, would you join me for a drink tonight? Seeing the look on her face, I decided to postpone going home to Mary until the next morning and join the director for the night. No, I actually wanted to join her. Because Susan and I had been after the same goal together for over half a year since my demotion. In a literal sense, we were comrades in arms. She and I had quite a few drinks at our usual and only pub. All the hard work you've put in, we managed to boost our performance, and yet they're pulling out, shutting down our branch. She grumbled, drinking heavily until she could hardly stand. What happened next? The following morning, as I started to tell the story, Mary leaned in, eager to hear more. I told her about escorting a thoroughly intoxicated Susan to her partner's house, which was about a 10-minute walk from the pub. There was a light on in Susan's house. I hadn't asked anything about her personal life until then, so I didn't even know if she was single or married. So, she's living with her family. I more or less carried Susan to the front door and rang the doorbell. A woman's voice from inside the house answered yes, and the front door opened. Susan, get a hold of yourself. The woman took hold of the drunk Susan, chiding her. Susan kept repeating, it's frustrating, so frustrating, under her breath. Who's that woman? Mary asked, looking puzzled. Susan's partner, I replied. Partner, I nodded slowly, and went on to describe the conversation afterwards between Susan and the woman. Susan clung to the woman in a childish and clingy manner that she'd never displayed at work. The woman gave me a wry smile, saying here we go again, before she took Susan inside, then came back to where I was standing at the entrance. Johnson, isn't it? Susan is always in your debt. She thanked me sincerely. Susan was sent to that branch because a company took issue with her living with someone who wasn't a spouse or recognized family member, I told Mary. Ever since, Susan had been living in a house they rented themselves, without receiving rent allowances from the company. Monday of the following week. As soon as I arrived at the office, Susan called me over to the reception area. The first thing she did was to apologize for her behavior on Friday, saying she had gotten so drunk she can't remember anything. I must have caused you trouble by having you take me home, and about what's going to happen from now on, Susan began, lowering her voice. She had decided to resign voluntarily without waiting for the company's formal notice. When she was reassigned to the sales office, she was headhunted by a client company, she said. At that time, she decided to stay with the company that had demoted her without any wrongdoing, hoping to give them a taste of their own medicine. She wasn't sure if that client would still hire her, but she had several other prospects, so she was planning to look for a job after leaving. My roommate suggested it might be better that way. And the roommate, Susan's partner, kindly suggested that Susan should lend a hand in my search for a new job if necessary. In other words, as long as I'm the director, I should be able to pull some strings. So why not use your paid vacation or whatever to help look for a new job? What do you think? Director Susan's words made me realize something. Since I was reassigned, I had sealed off the idea of changing jobs. That's why, no matter what order was handed down, I had decided to stay with this company. But the passive attitude would not do any good at this point. Now is the time to change jobs. But I was worried about what Mary would say if she found out I was changing jobs. That was my only concern. I contacted the headhunting agent again and started to look for a job. Thanks to Susan, the process of scheduling job interviews went smoothly. However, I couldn't find a company that would hire me. A month passed, and it was time for the boss to leave the office. I wonder if I've meddled in your situation too much, Susan said when I told her that I was having a hard time finding a new job. At that time, I still had the option to stay with the company. On the weekend, I went to Mary's apartment as usual. Oh, I see. Your boss Susan left the company, Mary said. And then she asked me what I was going to do. When I made a nervous face, she smiled and said, "You were looking for a new job, right?" Over the past month, when I came here for interviews, I had lied and said I was called into the headquarters, but Mary had seen right through it. I told her about how Susan was supporting my job hunting. With Susan gone, what are you going to do with your job search? To be honest, I'm not sure. I replied, I haven't found any prospective options, so I might end up sticking with my current company until retirement. You mentioned it before, right? When we first met, that the concept of a long employment at one company is outdated, Mary said, resting her hand on my shoulder. She then spoke. She disliked the idea of changing jobs out of boredom, but would agree 100% if the purpose was to find what I want to do. Don't you want to find a new job? I nodded, albeit reluctantly. But I hadn't made my mind yet. Then, Mary took out our joint bank statement from a drawer and showed it to me. With this much in savings, we can get by with just her income for a while. Leave it to me, so, please, take your time and find your next job. Inspired by her words, I resigned from the company, put all my effort into job hunting, and finally secured a job at my desired company. That weekend, Mary and I went out to the city to buy a new suit for me. By chance, we ran into Susan. She was with that woman. We stood there, catching up on what had been going on in our lives. And how about you? Susan asked, stepping back and looking at Mary behind me. I took Mary's arm, led her forward. She's my, partner. Mary gave a nervous nod. Oh, your wife is so beautiful and lovely, truly. You make a wonderful couple. Susan and her companion agreed. I put my arm around Mary's shoulder and said yes, looking at her. Mary was caressing her shiny wedding ring on her left hand's ring finger with her right hand. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Your subscription and likes give us the motivation to continue our work. We are looking forward to your comments as well. We'll see you in our next video. It was my first day at work at the company. I introduced myself in front of all the employees. I am Mark Johnson, who will be serving as the exclusive writer. In the middle of my self-introduction, I found myself at a loss for words. Unbelievably, the woman I thought I would never see again was standing right before me. What? Why is Susan here? As I widened my eyes in surprise, Susan also widened her eyes. I never dreamed that I would ever meet my ex-wife, who I divorced 2 years ago, in this way. My name is Mark Johnson. I am a divorced man turning 30 this year. Since my divorce last year, I have been living alone. My ex-wife Susan was a wonderful woman, 3 years older than me. She was very beautiful, youthful enough to make me look much older, yet her inner self was very calm. We met at a mixer and started dating smoothly, leading to a quick marriage. Compared to the beautiful Susan, I'm not exactly handsome, but Susan had a fineness for me. I worked as a writer, handling various types of articles as a contract job, which were published on websites and magazines. Before I met her in person, Susan was aware that I was working as a writer. Susan regularly checked my works, and thankfully, she developed an interest in me. I think you definitely have talent, Mark. I will work hard to make your dream come true. Susan always said this to me. Yes. Even though I was a writer, when I was married to Susan, I was just juggling a few freelance jobs, not possessing enough financial power to be the breadwinner of the family. I had wanted to be a full-fledged writer since I was 24. Before that, I worked as a regular full-time employee. Before I got married to Susan, I was barely getting by, living off my savings, but after we got married, Susan worked hard as a full-time employee and supported our household. Susan is a smart and excellent woman with outstanding knowledge and idea, and she was doing a great job at her company. I was taking advantage of Susan's actions, and while I was doing my writing work at home, I also did all the housework. I thought I would do the housework perfectly since I couldn't get results at work. I'm home. Tootie's dinner looks delicious. Thank you, Mark. No. It's only natural for me to do this because you're working hard outside, Susan. I'm really grateful to you. I said that and shared a dinner table with Susan. The time I spent with Susan was really fun, and every moment was sparkling. The day will definitely come when your talent, Mark, will be recognized. I'm really cheering for you. Susan. I was moved by Susan's words. When you're a writer working at home, there were many times when you honestly felt like giving up. This job requires you to be perfect in solitude, and no one is by your side to tell you the correct answer. Back then, I was unable to get enough work and was losing confidence. But because Susan was there, I managed to keep myself from breaking down. Susan, thank you. I can be positive because you're here. I'll keep working hard as a writer. I will always support you, Mark. We continued our married life in this way, always respecting each other. I really loved Susan, and I wanted to be with her forever. But my feelings were overturned by a certain incident. One day, while I was out shopping for dinner, I bumped into an old acquaintance. His name was Peter, a man at my age who had also attended the mixer, where I first met Susan. Mark, is that you? Shopping on a weekday, are you off today? Peter, in his crisp suit, asked me. He must have been returning from making sales calls. Peter, a handsome elite who worked in sales at a large corporation, was a highly competent man. At that time, I was out shopping in a plain tracksuit and feeling a bit embarrassed, I answered. Haha, I guess you could say every day is like a day off for me. So, does that mean Susan is the one working? Yeah, I'm not making much at the moment, so that's how it is. How pathetic. I didn't immediately understand what Peter meant. He let out a heavy sigh, looked at me with a disappointed face, and continued. I fell in love with Susan at that mixer. She was someone I admired. But Susan didn't even glance at me. She chose you. If you had something attractive about yourself, I could have accepted it. But now I'm disappointed. I was shocked by Peter's words. I had never imagined that he had feelings for Susan. Moreover, I never thought that such a mild-mannered and gentlemanly guy would berate me like this. Despite being deeply shaken, I managed to muster a forced smile and responded. Although, I might not have smiled properly due to my inner turmoil. Yeah, Susan is really a wife too good for me. If you understand that, why don't you step back? Peter gave me a cold look. It was a look of contempt from a fellow man. Susan is really pitiful. I bet she gets sympathy from her colleagues because her husband is like you. Susan is such a beautiful and wonderful woman. I still believe I could have made her happier than you. Mark, if you wish for her happiness, I recommend that you realize your place, even now. With that, Peter briskly walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling as though I had been struck on the head with a blunt object. I don't remember how I got home. But even after getting home, Peter's words kept flashing back in my mind, filling me with an unbearable feeling. It forced me to confront the inadequacy and inferiority I had vaguely felt as a husband. I have been married to Susan for 2 years, but as a writer, I haven't made any progress. My days are still filled with small jobs, and despite submitting my work to various companies hoping for a formal contract, but I'm getting no responses. I keep saying, I'll get results one day, but in reality, nothing changes. It's one thing to chase after a dream that might not come true by myself, but is it right to drag Susan along? Susan herself supports me and trusts me. But can I take responsibility if I fail to meet her expectations? Before I knew it, I was filled with self-pity and tears welled up in my eyes. I'm home. Wait, Mark. What's going on? Susan, surprised by my unusual mood, rushed to my side. Susan is always so kind to me and does so much for me. Despite this, I can't do anything for her. In that moment, I painfully realized this truth. Susan, let's get a divorce. The moment I said that, Susan looked at me with a startled expression. Oh, Mark, what happened? I'm no good. I can't make Susan happy. Susan seemed like she wanted to say something, but instead she just nodded gently and said, I understand. Maybe she could tell from the tears I shed. And so, in our second year of marriage, we put a period to our life together. It was a divorce we both agreed to, so the proceedings went smoothly. Even at our last goodbye, Susan smiled and cheered me on. She looked so refreshed, and I knew then that this separation was the right thing. Susan is a serious person, and she must have felt obliged to support me, but at the same time, she must have felt burdened. Mark, promise me this at least. I'll be waiting for you to succeed as a writer. Even at this parting, Susan was kind. Feeling her considerateness, I let out a small stream of tears as I said goodbye. Yeah, I'll keep on writing. After parting with Susan, I dedicated myself more to writing than ever before. Before, when Susan was around, we would go out as a couple, but now I am truly alone. Thankfully, I have plenty of time. I wrote and wrote as if I were possessed. Sometimes when I felt like giving up, I would think alternately of Peter and Susan. I wanted to become a man who could make Peter, who looked down on me, look up to me, and I was determined to fulfill my promise to Susan. By doing this, I was able to motivate myself and make more achievement in my work than ever before. My writing improved and I started to get higher paying jobs. Then I thought I'd enter a contest in a web media, so I found a promising contest in a magazine and applied. As a result, I was hired by a major web media company. I was going to be employed as a full-time writer, so I could expect a stable life, promotions, and raises from now on. Most importantly, I was told that I might be able to take on assignments from publishing companies and I might even be asked to travel overseas for cover stories. I wanted to write various articles and send them out to the world. It was a moment when my dream came true. I did it. I shouted with joy in my empty room. I wish I could have shared this moment with Susan. It will soon be 2 years since I divorced her. I'm still alone, but I'm sure she, the charming woman, has already been blessed with a new good encounter. For me, that's the greatest joy. There are plenty of men who are more suitable for Susan than me, a cowardly man. Yes, like that Peter. She can choose as many handsome and wealthy men as she wants. I have to move on too. With that thought, I said goodbye to Susan again in my heart, but later I was to be hit by an unexpected situation. A few days later, I went directly to the major web media company that had hired me. Normally, since I'm a writer, I can work remotely, but from now on, I need to have meetings with the editor in charge at the office. So, first of all, I had to greet all the employees. And after the greeting and the tour of the company, a welcome party for me was held. I was truly grateful for such a warm welcome. After a long while, I put on a suit and, nervously, I set foot into the company. I'm nervous. The company exuded a modern feel, its marble floors sparkling and shining. I was immediately overwhelmed by the stylish and contemporary office. All right, Mr. Johnson, this way. Led by the young president in his 40s, I stepped into the PC room where everyone was waiting. I am Mark Johnson, who has been appointed as an exclusive writer for this company. In the midst of introducing myself, I was left speechless. Unbelievably, the woman I thought I would never see again was standing in front of me. What? Why is Susan here? As I expressed my surprise and widened my eyes, Susan was also taken aback. I never dreamed of meeting my ex-wife, whom I had divorced 2 years ago, in such a circumstance. But I couldn't stand there silently any longer in front of everyone. Though I still have much to learn, I look forward to working with all of you. I finished my faltering greeting and bowed deeply. Even while everyone was giving a warm applause, my mind was filled with thoughts of Susan. Why was she working at this company? The president later gave a detailed explanation about the company's facilities and services. But I regretfully was somewhat preoccupied. The encounter earlier was too shocking. In the evening, a welcome party for me was held, and we went to a restaurant with 30 company members. During the party, I asked the president about Susan. The president, who was in a good mood from drinking, talked eloquently about Susan. Yes, we had hunted Susan because she was so competent and made her an executive of our company. Becoming an executive all of a sudden, that's impressive. Susan was working in web marketing at her previous company, and attracting customers on the web is her forte. Also, she had excellent grades in the Department of Humanities at a national university. So of course, she has excellent writing skills and talent as an editor. In fact, she is really standing out in our company. I'm really glad we hired her. Just as the president said, Susan had excellent grades at the Department of Humanities at a national university. She had told me herself that when she was job hunting, she struggled to decide whether to work at a publishing company or an IT company. But in this company, she can showcase both of her skills, which is perfect for her. As I was thinking this, Susan came over to me. I was relieved because I was worried she might avoid me. Mark, it's been a long time. I was surprised. I never expected to meet you again like this. Me neither. Seeing Susan up close after a long time, I was unexpectedly nervous. Even after 2 years apart, she was still as charming as ever. To be able to talk so naturally again. I never even dreamed of this. But really, congratulations. Our web media gets a lot of various work frequently. I'm very honored to be able to work with you, Mark. I look forward to working with you in the future. Same here, I look forward to it. And so we began our relationship as a good business partner. The company's culture suited me, and I was able to concentrate on writing in a comfortable and enjoyable environment. I visited the office regularly for work meetings and actively communicated with Susan. She was such a competent woman and gave me precise instructions. Mark, last month's article was a hit in terms of traffic. There was a lot of feedback from people wanting to read more, so I'm thinking of turning it into a series. That's great news. Is there anything I should pay attention to? In this way, we meticulously discussed our work. Every time we compared our ideas, the results visibly improved, and being evaluated directly like this also motivated me. Honestly, I never dreamed that a day would come when I could interact with Susan in this way. I used to respect Susan, but I was always riddled with complexes. Even though Susan was cheering me on, I continued to feel pathetic in my constant anxiety and feelings of inferiority. But now it's different. I have confidence in myself now, and I no longer feel inferior as I used to. Susan herself must feel this change in the air, and I can say with certainty that our relationship feels better than before. Although we have been apart for 2 years, it seems that what we cultivated during that time was not in vain. I think I still love Susan. Half a year since I met with Susan again, I could feel my affection for Susan growing day by day. But I was the one who brought up the divorce, and there's no way Susan feels the same about me. Even from the perspective of her ex-husband, Susan is now sparkled. Susan, who was successful at work, was very attractive and radiant, a figure of admiration among the male employees. The kindness Susan shows me might just be for work, and in reality, I'm probably just a thing of the past. While my feelings for Susan grew stronger, I was trying to convince myself to give up, but an incident awaited us that would greatly shake our relationship. Here's to the growth of our company. Cheers. At the president's toast, all the employees raised their glasses and started toasting each other. Today was the regularly scheduled company-wide drinking party. Coincidentally, Susan was sitting next to me today, which made my heart beat fast. Unlike her serious suit style at work, Susan was cute in a dress today and had heavier makeup. I hadn't seen Susan like this in a while, and while I felt a fresh thrill, I also felt that Susan probably already had a new partner. There's no way such a wonderful woman would be left alone. I felt a little sting in my heart and fought to drown my feelings in alcohol, drinking at a high pace. But surprisingly, Susan next to me was drinking at an even higher pace. Was Susan always such a heavy drinker? Another whiskey and soda, please. Are you sure you're okay? Your face is all red. I'm fine. I'm not drunk. Susan said so, but she was clearly drunk. The drinking party started at 6 p.m., and by the second hour, Susan was completely drunk. After that, the other employees got excited about going to the second party, and Susan was saying, "Me too," and tried to follow them. But there was no way she could walk the streets safely in heels with being so drunk. Seeing her like this, I decided to take her home. Fortunately, the other members were too excited about the second party to tease us. I planned to go home as soon as I send Susan safely to her house. But suddenly Susan started feeling unwell and turned pale, shivering. It appears that the drawbacks of drinking alcohol at a high pace have now caught up to her. From this bar to Susan's house it takes about an hour, but if we head to my apartment, it's only about a 15-minute ride. I immediately hailed a cab and headed straight to my apartment. It's unusual for Susan to end up like this. Thinking this, I was taking care of her in the cab. Susan, who's usually calm and composed, was completely drunk and out of her senses. Upon arriving at my apartment, I put Susan to bed. Susan was already fast asleep, and I kept watch over her the entire time. I never thought I'd see the day Susan would come back here. Naturally, all the days I spent with her began to resurface one after another in my mind. While cherishing those memories, I also felt a sort of melancholy. When she wakes up, she'll be leaving here promptly. We were supposed to be over, yet that fact felt unbearably sad to me. As I was indulging in these indescribable feelings, she quietly woke up. Looking at the clock, nearly 3 hours had passed since Susan came to my place. She had been lying quietly for a while, and it seemed like the alcohol had somewhat worn off. Susan was looking around the room wide-eyed. Why am I here? I brought you here because you were drunk and intoxicated, Susan. I wanted to take you home, but you didn't seem well. I'm sorry, that was irresponsible of me. No, it's all right, but you should avoid drinking like that. It's especially dangerous for a woman. Here, have some water. Just as I was about to hand Susan a bottle of water, she clung to me. I was momentarily frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. At that moment, Susan was quietly shedding big brown tears. When you were sitting next to me, I was so nervous. I drank that much to hide my nervousness. But you're really kind. Susan, hearing Susan's words, I was stunned. I didn't expect Susan to be conscious of me in that way. I like you, Mark. I realized that after rereading your articles, the one on nursing I read before I met you at to Susan's story reminded me of her father, who passed away after we'd unmarried. Susan's father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease at a young age. Until he was admitted to a nursing home, Susan and her mill had been taking care of him at home. From my early 20s until I was 30, I was caught between work and caregiving. Honestly, I was exhausted. I despaired at my seemingly endless life, and I even began to resent my father. I hated myself for feeling that way about my father, whom I loved so much. Back then, Susan had apparently been weeping day in and day out. I couldn't possibly blame her when I heard that story back then. It's not easy for a young woman to give up romance and private life to focus on caregiving. Susan started reminiscing about those times. When I was feeling down about my father, I came across your writing, Mark, and it saved me. Not just the nursing articles, but your other articles were also truly wonderful. That's why I was really happy to meet you at the mixer. Saying that, Susan looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. The intensity of her expression echoed deeply within my heart. I was despairing of life, but just by glancing over the words that you, Mark, put together, I felt my will to live bubbling back up. There are such wonderful things in this world. Even when I was swamped with caregiving and couldn't go out, if I opened my laptop, I could encounter the world you had painted. You can't imagine how much that saved me. I was deeply touched to hear that Susan had been so moved by my articles. Thank you, but I feel like I've only caused trouble for you. No, that's not true. My happiness lies in seeing your dreams come true, Mark. There are definitely people out there who will be saved by your writing, just like me. I parted ways with you with a smile that day, but in reality, I was crying inside. If my presence added to your pressure, I'm really sorry. That's not true, because you were there, Susan. I could keep writing, saying that I held Susan tightly. We may have misunderstood and passed each other by, but we can start over from here. As we spent the night together, we felt more connected than ever before. This was the first time either of us had experienced such unity of feelings. Thus, we reaffirmed our love for each other and decided to restart our relationship. Ideally, I wanted to remarry immediately, but a new challenge presented itself to us. Wait, I will be in charge of an interview articles overseas. The president's words left me shocked, and as I froze, he continued to speak as if to say, "Aren't you thrilled?" Yes, a major publisher wants you on their team. They'll cover all costs, and it'll surely boost your career. You get to travel to various countries for a year, gaining plenty of experience. Isn't it a dream job? Waltla was an attractive offer. It meant being away from Susan for a year. I was conflicted about whether to go or not, but Susan welcomed the offer with a smile. That's amazing. It's a valuable experience to travel around the world. I'd love to read about the world as seen through Mark's eyes. Susan's words took me by surprise. At the same time, I felt foolish for having worried so much. That's right. Distance and time are no issue. Even if there are periods when we can't see each other, as long as there's love and writing, we can overcome anything. Yeah, you're right. I'll become a bigger man in preparation for our marriage, Susan. And so, I accepted the offer and set off on a one-year research trip. Susan was there at the airport to see me off, a glittering engagement ring on her right hand. When I returned, I intended to present her with a large wedding ring for her left hand. Take care. Yeah, I'll do my best. With smiles on our faces, we began walking toward